Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented as always by Full Press Coverage. Check out fullpresscoverage.com for this podcast, other great podcasts, other articles, you name it. They have some great stuff. Find our podcast wherever podcasts are found. You can download us right on iTunes or in the podcast store on your app on your phone. Very easy and convenient. YouTube.com/JetStryer for the visual version if you are not watching that right now. Here we are, Sap, the day after the first round of the NFL draft. So a very exciting time in the sports world. And the NBA world is no different. No, maybe it's overshadowed by the NFL when the two go head to head. In our hearts, it's number one. So I know that there's been lots of talk about your guy, Aaron Rodgers, going to different places, but have you been able to fight through all the Rodgers rumors and hone in on basketball at all? Or is it just too exciting?
I can multitask. I'm pretty good at that. And it was exciting yesterday when the story dropped, which didn't surprise me because I think that's been Aaron Rodgers' feelings really since last draft when the Packers moved up 4 slots to take Jordan Love in the first round. He being the heir successor to Aaron Rodgers, and Rodgers goes out and has an MVP season. The Packers go to the NFC Championship game, lose to Tom Brady. But I think he wants to get out of Green Bay before they push him out of Green Bay because you could just see that the relationship was headed in the wrong direction last April. So I think Rodgers has the type of attitude, and he is, as you said, very much of a grudge holder. A legendary grudge holder. He still probably could name all the teams that passed on him in the 2005 draft. And I think he wants to get out before they push him out. So whether he ends up with the Raiders, the Broncos, Think to throw the Cleveland Browns into the mix because I think he'd be a major upgrade over Baker Mayfield, and their roster is loaded. But I don't think he wants to go to Cleveland. I think he wants to stay closer to the West Coast. He's from California, and then he can also host Jeopardy in the offseason, which only takes 46 days to record all of the episodes for the entire year. So he can kind of multitask himself, host Jeopardy and play quarterback as well. So I would think the Broncos look like the leading contender because they have a pretty decent roster and they apparently have salary cap room, and they had an opportunity to draft either Justin Fields or Mac Jones, and they bypassed on both of those quarterbacks, took a corner instead. So maybe they're already in talks with Green Bay to acquire Aaron Rodgers, and if that's the case, then I got to become a Broncos fan.
Yeah, I was texting some of my friends from college who are Broncos fans because they grew up in Denver, and they were making fun of them, saying the only way John Elway can scout quarterbacks is apparently if they had 15 years of service time in the NFL and have won an MVP, because he's whiffed time and time again in the draft.
3 MVPs, Jet. 3, not 1. He's won 3 MVPs. Don't short my guy.
Sorry, it was just a general term. He's won an MVP in his career. We know he's won 3. It was
3.
Just like
3.
Okay,
well, the last quarterback he went and got had already won 4 MVPs in Peyton Manning. So that's really the only way. You're right. That's the only. Just okay. I can't figure this out with guys coming out of college. Let me just go get the best damn quarterback that's out there. It'd be actually kind of cool if Rodgers went to Denver, because in my opinion, you'd have the 3rd, 4th, and 5th greatest quarterback of the Super Bowl era, behind only Tom Brady at number 1 and Joe Montana at number 2. I rank Manning at number 3, Elway at number 4, and Rodgers at number 5. And Rodgers can really get into that discussion if he can win another Super Bowl. I don't know if Denver's the best place to go do that. I think Green Bay's roster is better. Its division is easier. I think the conference is probably a little easier, other than Tom Brady is now in the NFC. But he just feels slighted. Look, the last 10 first-round picks that the Green Bay Packers have selected, 9 of them are on defense, and the only offensive player they selected in their last 10 first-round picks happened to be a quarterback, Jordan Love, who they selected to replace Aaron Rodgers at some point. So, he probably is looking for help. And what did the Packers do last night? They drafted a cornerback, which they actually do need. But it's going to be fun to watch. Doesn't the NFL feel more like the NBA now in the offseason, where quarterbacks are demanding to get traded? And
this offseason specifically, you're right, it has turned into that. Before the legal stuff with Deshaun Watson, that was the big story, obviously. Right. And then the past couple of days we heard Jimmy Garoppolo and that the 49ers are going to trade him. And then obviously right before the draft, the Aaron Rodgers news. And so it does feel a lot more like the NBA, and that's good for the NFL, because it generates, it generates a 365-day a year news cycle, and quarterbacks have been that sort of that last bastion of they play their entire career or most of their career with one team, versus every other position. People are moving on. How Jerry Rice played for two other teams after he left the 49ers. And if that guy can play on multiple teams, anybody should be able to play on multiple teams. And so, yeah, it has become a little bit more like the NBA set, but I don't know if it's because they saw what was going on in the NBA and the players said, hey, we want a piece of this action too, or it's just sort of the natural progression of sports in general.
In the past, quarterbacks would move on, but generally very late in their career. I mean, Johnny Unitas ended up in a San Diego Charger uniform, which looked very weird after seeing him in a Colts uniform for his entire career. Joe Namath spent 1 year with the Rams, but he was washed up at that point. Joe Montana spent his last 2 years in Kansas City and was damn good in those 2 years, but not the Joe Montana of what he was in San Francisco. But it kind of started to change when Peyton Manning went from Indianapolis to Denver and won an MVP and a Super Bowl. And then, of course, the thing no one ever thought was going to happen, except I talked about it for several years, especially when we were on Herald Radio together. Tom Brady went from the Patriots to Tampa Bay. I know last year at this time, people were like, I don't believe cannot believe it happened. No one can believe it happening but me, because this is how these things end. I mean, Belichick, we know, likes to get away from a player a year earlier rather than a year late. And it just, after 20 years, they'd had enough. And Brady wanted to go prove to everybody, including himself, that he could win without Belichick. Well, the first year separated, that's a clear TKO for Tom Brady. He went out and won the Super Bowl, and the Patriots won 7 games, forcing them to spend all this money in free agency. So now I think Tom Brady has kind of crippled the entire league, because now you got Russell Wilson talking about he's not happy in Seattle. Aaron Rodgers
forgot about that.
In Green Bay. There's another great quarterback that was looking to maybe move on from Seattle. It seems like they've kind of corrected whatever problems they have there. I like the fact that players can be mobile, because it certainly makes the offseason exciting. A couple levels below the likes of Brady and Wilson and Rodgers. Jared Goff goes from the Rams to Detroit. You got Matt Stafford going from Detroit to the Rams. You got Carson Wentz going from Philly to Indy. Fascinating stuff. Even Sam Darnold, who's another couple layers below those guys, goes from the Jets to Carolina. So it's a fun time to follow sports, because the games are exciting enough, but when the offseason captivates you like basketball and the NFL, that is great for those two sports. Meanwhile, baseball's a month into the season and I can't get into it.
Yeah, it's hard to. I mean, really, baseball doesn't make it easy, and their offseason was at one point, even when I was a kid, it was like the most entertaining offseason. Now it's by far the worst of all the off seasons. Mm-hmm. Teams wait right until spring training starts to sign guys. I mean, I don't know. Baseball used to be the hot stove. Now it's the cold freezer. It's the absolute opposite. That. I don't know what happened, because baseball used to be like a flurry. The free agency was a flurry of activity, and for whatever reason, I think they saw, you know what? There's too much excitement here. We got to tamper it down. Our fan base can't have this much excitement. They'll have heart attacks and die. So,
most of them are on some sort of medication to, control blood flow. So we don't want to get them too excited. Yeah, I remember 20 years ago, Manny Ramirez signed with the Red Sox, and a few years later, the giant rumor, and it was close to happening, was that Manny Ramirez was going to be traded for Alex Rodriguez, who was with Texas at that time. I mean, you're talking about two all-time great hitters. It got voided by the Players Association, which that's the difference between the NBA and really any sport. The NBA encourages this because the players are very comfortable saying, I'll sign for 3 years, I'll move on. And we saw Kevin Durant do that with Golden State. We've seen LeBron do it countless times, whether it be in Miami or Cleveland. He's now in LA, and I wouldn't be shocked if LeBron ends up somewhere else to wrap up his career. Whereas in football, it's been normally you stay there till you're pretty much at your end, and then they'll move on from you. But now Tom Brady at 43 years old won a Super Bowl, and Tampa's the favorite to win it this year. And if Aaron Rodgers goes to, say, Cleveland, let me just throw that out there, then I think the Browns become probably co-favorites with Kansas City in the AFC, because these great quarterbacks are playing longer and they have such an impact on the results of these games.
Yeah, and I think with the NFL, you look at it, you sign the contract, and they go, tough crap. You're either going to cut you if we can't use you anymore, or if you're a quarterback, you're playing out the rest of the contract. You're not. They don't let them hit free agency because they have the franchise tag and stuff. But you see in the NBA, like James Harden, he signed a contract. He still had 2 years left on, and he said, "I want to
Yep.
go," and he forced them to trade him. It's just completely different. The contract has almost become meaningless in the NBA in terms of years because players are so mobile and so powerful that they basically get what they want. And I think a lot of fans maybe are turned off by that, and it's sort of I probably blame LeBron James for the player movement in the NFL too.
Yeah, well, he gets blamed for everything. So why not blame him for whatever ills take place in the NFL, Major League Baseball, hockey? I mean, he's now 2% owner of Fenway Sports Group, which owns the Boston Red Sox. So yeah, blame LeBron for the ails of baseball.
Yeah, and maybe that if Aaron Rodgers wants to save face with the Packers fans in the state of Wisconsin, he can say, it was really LeBron's idea for me to try
Sure.
to. We talked. He said I should try to get out of here. You just lay all the blame at the feet of LeBron.
Well, I also think that that's a good point, Jet, because the top quarterbacks, they talk to each other. I mean, that's really a brotherhood, a fraternity, right? So that Rodgers talks to Brady. They both probably talk to Russell Wilson. And now
I
we
think
hear a
they
rumor
talk to
that
their contemporaries. I don't think they like the younger guys so much.
no, they become the cranky old men, right? Like,
Yeah,
these
right.
guys are trying to steal our jobs. We're not going to talk
Yeah.
to them. But Brady and Rodgers are buddies. And one rumor that came out yesterday is that, the Patriots were interested in Aaron Rodgers, which of course excited me because I wrote a column a year ago that that's the way his career was going to end in Foxborough with Bill Belichick. And of course, the Patriots drafted Mac Jones in the first round. So that's not going to happen. But part of the reason that Rodgers wouldn't want to come to New England is because of Josh McDaniels, which leads me to believe that I'm sure when he talked to Brady, that Brady didn't maybe have great things to say about Josh McDaniels because he's going to trust Brady more than he is Josh McDaniels. And if Brady's like, this guy probably not right for you, go elsewhere. Unless Brady is so, so deep at what he's doing that he's controlling all the chess pieces on the chessboard. But I think what Brady did going at the age of 43 from the Patriots, one of the best run organizations in the history of the NFL, to normally a tire fire in Tampa and having
Yeah.
them win a Super Bowl in 1 year, that just has the entire league like up in arms going, we've got to try to catch that lightning in a bottle ourselves. And Aaron Rodgers is that good to make that happen, or Russell Wilson's that good to make it happen. And that's why you hear all these rumors. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it really is, and I think you nailed it when you said right at the beginning that it's starting to resemble the NBA a whole lot more, at least the NBA that we've known of since the decision. Really, I mean that was the flashpoint, right? Was the decision in the NBA kind of for like real aggressive player movement?
Yeah, it was, but it also took place in 1996. And I know in a future podcast, we're going to talk about that when full vetted free agency started in 1996, there was a pretty well known player who was potentially going to be a free agent. His name was Michael Jordan. But the league wasn't as mobile as it is now. I think LeBron is the player that said, you know what, you could spend your first 7 years in Cleveland, realize that the organization's not very good, the management's not very good, and I'm going to go play somewhere else and hook up with some other great players and try to win a championship. It started in 96, but there were a few more restrictions than there are now. But yeah, the decision was one of the biggest events really of the last 10, 12 years. LeBron heard a lot of negativity about it. I think it was, an overreaction by people who just don't like LeBron James. But I think all the players in the league now look to LeBron James as a pioneer, that he was the first one that really pushed through. And now the players all feel that they can go where they want to go when they want to go.
Yeah, it's I mean, you're seeing it, like I said, even guys who are under contract, not necessarily free agents. So with
Mm-hmm.
Anthony Davis, New Orleans, saw it this past right before the season started. James
Yep.
Harden wanted out of Houston and got his way, and they also are able to dictate what teams they get traded to
Yep.
because they just have it's just a ridiculous amount of power. So, all of this is a long segue into where we are right now in the NBA season, Sap, which is just about 2 weeks remaining. And it's really interesting coming down the stretch here because with the play-in things are sort of muddled in terms of who we're going to be looking at as a final field of playoff teams. And even the top seeds are by no means settled with two weeks left to go. So uh, out west, I think that top seed race is a little bit more interesting because I do think it's more meaningful. But the Eastern Conference, Brooklyn is certainly not out of the woods in terms of being clinching that number one seed too. But again, for them, I feel like it matters a little bit less. So what races are you looking at with the 2 week mark left to go, Sep, that are really intriguing to you?
I'm still looking at the number one seed in the Eastern Conference, not because of Brooklyn, but because of Philadelphia. Philadelphia would need home court advantage to advance to the finals. We agree Brooklyn doesn't. When you have three stars of that caliber, Kevin Durant, James Harden, Kyrie Irving, we've got guys that have won on the road in the past in the postseason. They can be the number two seed and still get to the finals. They'd still probably be the favorite to get to the final, where I think if Philadelphia could be the one seed, they'll avoid Milwaukee in the second round, let Milwaukee play Brooklyn in that second round. You would think that Brooklyn would still beat Milwaukee, but that could be a 6-game series and a pretty intense series. Meanwhile, you would expect Philadelphia to waltz to the conference finals and then await the winner of that other series between Brooklyn and Milwaukee, but with home court advantage. So I think that's important for Philadelphia. Brooklyn, they don't need it as much. So in the Eastern Conference, because we do think there's just 3 viable championship caliber teams, right? Milwaukee,
Yeah.
Brooklyn, and Philadelphia. The rest of the conference is just like, okay, who's going to finish fourth? I kind of hope that the Knicks finish fourth and actually win a series and get to the conference semifinals, because I think it would be kind of fascinating. And they'd be a pain in the ass type of team to match up with for one of those top 3 teams. They wouldn't win. They may not even win a game, but they'd battle you. They play really good defense. They seem to be totally engaged in the culture of Tom Thibodeau. So that's about it in the Eastern Conference. The Western Conference is going to be more fascinating down the stretch, because I think that the seeding out west is going to be important, more so than even in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, right now in the East, Sap. So Brooklyn's at the top with a 43-20 record, game and a half behind them as the Sixers, and then 4.5 games out of that one seed are the Milwaukee Bucks.
Yep.
That looks like that's pretty unattainable for Milwaukee.
Right.
I know they do play Brooklyn twice, so they can take 2 games off of them. So they can cut that lead in half. But it's a lot of games, 4.5 with not a lot of games left. So I'd say Milwaukee's is pretty much entrenched in that 3 seed is my guess. But yeah, Philadelphia certainly has a very realistic chance of getting that 1 seed. And I think I agree with you, Sap, that they really need it. We've talked about how good they are at home versus they're kind of middling on the road. And it's a team that needs really every advantage they can get if they hope to advance to the NBA Finals, because as great as Joel Embiid is playing, they still have some pretty noticeable flaws. Embiid has faded sometimes in the playoffs, especially in the second half of games. His conditioning hasn't been all that great. He's had some injuries this year, so you're worried about if those could crop back up potentially. In addition to that, Ben Simmons hasn't lit it up in the playoffs in his career, and he's going to be asked to do more in the playoffs, because that's just how it goes. As the rotations get shorter and the star players are asked to do a little bit more. So I think there's still plenty of questions about Ben Simmons in terms of how he's going to perform in the postseason. And if he has home court advantage, I think that helps him. So we'll see what happens. And as you alluded to, Sap, in the West right now, it's extremely tight for that 1 seed. In fact, Denver sitting at the 4 is only 3.5 games out of that 1 spot. The Clippers are at the 3. They're 3 games back. Phoenix is just 1 game back. And so Utah is sort of clinging on to that 1 seed right now in the West with a 45-17 record. Do you see Utah ending up as the 1 seed, or do you see one of those teams jumping him?
Phoenix just continues to surprise. I mean, even when they lose games, they're at least competitive in those games. They played Brooklyn last week, and they were kind of right there with them. And then Kevin Durant in the fourth quarter did what Kevin Durant can do. He just puts his team on his shoulders, his very slight shoulders, and he carries them to the finish line, and they win. So I think Phoenix, they could be the team that has just been so strong for the last 3 months. Let's not forget they got off to an 8-8 start. Since that point, they've been the best team in basketball. They could maybe steal that number 1 seed. Now, I think that Utah wants that number 1 seed again for home court advantage, because you do have some built-in advantage playing in the altitude, as does Denver. Utah and Denver, both well-coached teams. They've got players that can be impactful in the postseason, but another advantage they have over the other teams is they play in high altitude. So that could be something that could maybe tilt, especially their first round series, in their advantage. Um, and I think that what you want to see out of the Lakers is somehow hold on to the 5 seed, although Dallas is coming strong and Dallas holds the tiebreaker over the Lakers. If Dallas catches and surpasses the Lakers, then the Lakers become the 6 seed, which means a first round series against the Clippers, which I'm not thrilled with because I think the only team that can beat the Lakers is the Clippers. Are the Clippers, or is Los Angeles? Are the Clippers is better? Is more
Either way.
grammatically. It is grammatically correct, and it's because of Rajon Rondo. It's not because of Kawhi Leonard or Paul George or
He's your
anyone else.
boogeyman.
He
You're
scares
so
the hell
scared
out
of
me.
Rajon
Well,
Rondo.
last off season, I'm like, why are you letting him go, and why are you letting Dwight Howard go? I mean, I guess from a game to game standard, Dennis Schroeder's better than Rajon Rondo. I don't know what Schroeder's going to do in the postseason. I know what Rondo's doing in the postseason.
Well, Sap, I mean, we both agreed when we started this podcast 50 some odd episodes ago, we were looking at who had the best offseason moves. We both agreed that it was the Lakers. We liked their offseason the best.
Yeah, until I realized
it's a
Rondo
little bit of
wasn't there.
revisionist history
It
here.
is, because he scares the hell out of me. He's a winning player. I mean, I'm trying to think who you could compare him to in football. I know you, as a Patriots fan, growing up, you loved Rodney Harrison, right?
Yeah,
That
he
was
was
one of
probably
your
my
favorite players.
one of my all-time favorites.
So Rondo kind of has that same thing that Rodney Harrison had. Like, he just made big plays and big moments. I mean, let's not forget the 2004 AFC Championship game. It was pretty tight against Pittsburgh, and they were going in for a score late in the second quarter, and Harrison picks off Ben Roethlisberger down near the Patriots' goal line and returns it for a touchdown.
Well, that's not that uncommon for Ben Roethlisberger.
Ben Roethlisberger to throw
around
pick
the goal
six.
line.
Yeah, he does do that, especially, you're going into score and then they score. That's a 14-point swing. So, and Rondo has that same type of ability. So he scares me. And I was not thrilled with losing Dwight Howard because, maybe, Marc Gasol can do more things than Dwight Howard, but Dwight Howard was totally in Nikola Jokic's head last year in the Western Conference Finals because Dwight Howard's an irritating player, as is Rondo. And you kind of need that type of edge when you've got LeBron and Anthony Davis. You don't want them to be the enforcers by any means. You don't need them getting technicals or getting thrown out of a game. You need these other guys to do the dirty work. So Rondo scares me. I wish he had just stayed in the Eastern Conference. I'd be totally confident that the Lakers will, get back to the NBA Finals. I don't want to see them play the Clippers in the first round. I'm sure the networks don't either. I mean, they would prefer to have Clippers, Lakers, Western Conference Finals. That makes the most sense because, I mean, as good as Denver, Utah, and Phoenix have been, they're not Los Angeles and either the Lakers or the Clippers. So I think I'm hoping the Lakers avoid the Clippers in the first round. If they avoid them in the first round, they probably won't have to play them until the conference finals.
Yeah, but it's so fluid right now, Sap. And you mentioned the Mavericks are really coming on strong. They're just a game back of the Lakers now, and they have the tiebreaker. And the Lakers, as you said, stand at the 5 seed. Denver is at the 4. But like I said, Denver is just a half game back of the Clippers for that 3 seed, and the Clippers are just 3 games back of the 1 seed, 2 games back of the 2 seed. So it's almost impossible to prognosticate 2 weeks out because it's so close where the seeding is going to lie. I think we even looking at Portland is only 2 games back of the Lakers for that 5 seed right now. So between these teams in the Western Conference, I'd say from 7 to 5, any of those teams. So Portland, Dallas, LA. I wouldn't be surprised if they end up in any order of that because they're all so close together. And then 4 to 1, it looks like they could end up in any sort of order.
Yeah, we're going to come right down to the end. And again, a lot of this will be determined by when LeBron James returns, because I think once he comes back, then the Lakers become that much stronger. And it's going to take him a little while to get up to speed. I don't think it's going to take him weeks, but maybe a few games to be closer to be what LeBron James is. We've seen Anthony Davis is still very rusty at this point. So now the rotations are a little bit messed up at this point. So it's not that easy to miss 2-3 months as individuals. As a team, you can do that because that happened last year in the bubble. You come back as a team and you get your act together. And
everybody's on the same playing field in the bubble.
And you had 8 games to get that rust off, right? So that worked out perfectly. Whereas this time around, everybody's up to speed right now. And then LeBron comes back, and let's not forget he's going to be 36 in December. with 37 in December. He's 36 already. So, I mean, it takes a little bit longer. I know he's superhuman and all of that, but, he's still a mortal,
Yeah,
barely. But I
it's
think,
like I told you, Sap. Much ado about nothing with the Lakers
okay.
injuries.
Well,
Uh,
I'm a neurotic person, as you are.
Clearly,
So
yeah.
we're
Yeah.
both neurotic. So I'm neurotic about the Lakers, and you're neurotic or just disappointed about the Celtics more than
Yeah, I
neurotic.
mean everybody is, but yeah, I think it's a really interesting race out in the West. The East has become less interesting because it's deeper, but the top three we know are all viable, and between Philly and Brooklyn,
Mhm.
that one seed is certainly going to be important. Again, we talked about this last week, Sap. Philly, for some reason, took their foot off the gas pedal and
Yeah.
lost a couple of really bad games, holding out Simmons, holding out Embiid. And they could be firmly entrenched in the one seed right now if they had really gone for it. I'm not sure what the logic is. Well, actually, I know what the logic is. They want to be as healthy as possible for the playoffs, but I'd say I'd rather be the one seed and maybe have those guys a little bit more fatigued than be the two seed and have to
Right.
play, both Milwaukee and Brooklyn. And I don't think it's a guarantee that Philly beats Milwaukee if they have to play them in the second
No.
round. I think that would
No.
be a 7-game series. Could go completely either way.
Yeah, exactly. It would be an exhausting series, and who's waiting for you in the conference finals? A Brooklyn team that maybe loses one game in the first two rounds.
Yeah,
Goes 8-1 in the first two
I
rounds, and
already
you're just
told you. I
sitting
think
there.
they're losing 3-4 games tops in the postseason, Brooklyn. So
Well, you know what? If they go undefeated through the Eastern Conference, go 12-0 in the Eastern Conference, and lose 4 games in the finals to the Lakers, I'll be happy with that.
I think that would surprise a lot of people if they rip through the Eastern Conference undefeated and then get swept in the finals.
But how much of an accomplishment would that be for LeBron James? Let's say he's the 5 seed,
Yes, Sap. It would be a great
and
accomplishment for your
no,
guy.
if they're the 5 seed and they beat Denver in the first round and Utah in the second round, and either Phoenix or the Clippers in the conference finals, and then they take on, this beast from the East, the Brooklyn Nets, that would give him 5 championships. Still one fewer than Michael Jordan, but Michael Jordan never had to go through that to win a championship. So,
I think that unless the Lakers go through the Clippers in the West, that people aren't going to be as impressed with what LeBron does. They have to beat the Clippers because as great as Phoenix and Utah have played this season,
mhm. Yep.
it's the star power of the Clippers and sort
Right.
of that matchup that we've been talking about for 2 years now, facing off against Kawhi and the other team in the West that's really the title favorite with the Lakers. So I do feel like if they go through that scenario that you just said, beat Denver and then beat Utah, beat Phoenix, something along those lines, that people will look at it and go, he didn't have that difficult of a path, regardless of what the
That's
records
still
say.
pretty difficult. But yeah, I know the Clippers are the team that you would expect has the best chance to beat the Lakers. I know Skip Bayless still talks about that last year was a flawed championship for LeBron because they didn't have to beat the Clippers. But it wasn't LeBron's fault that the Clippers had a 3-1 lead over Denver and lost that series. In fact, they had double-digit leads in games 5, 6, and 7 and lost all of those
No, they
games.
pissed it
Not
away.
his
Yeah.
fault. Yeah, I mean, you can't control other teams that you're not even playing against. You just have to take care of business. I mean, do we hold back about Larry Bird's greatness because his first championship was against a 40-42 Houston Rockets team? No,
And
I don't.
as far as who their opponents are in the finals, yeah, I think if he beats Brooklyn, that would obviously be the most
Yeah,
impressive. Philadelphia would be impressive. Milwaukee would be the least impressive of those
yeah.
teams. Even though I do like Milwaukee's chances to get there if Brooklyn doesn't.
Mhm.
You like Philly a little bit more. I like Milwaukee a little bit more. Yeah, whatever it is at this point with LeBron, he's not going to get full credit because he's just so polarizing. That
Right.
someone will poke holes in it, and whoever he plays in the finals this year, if the Lakers get there, which I expect that they will, it will certainly look like a more quality opponent than they played last year with
Oh yeah,
Miami, because that was, I think you agree, that was the worst finals team he's faced.
absolutely. Yeah, and the second worst team he faced in the finals was Dallas, and he lost to them. That's still the finals, appearance that still irritates me as a LeBron supporter. Is if he found a way to win that series, if he just played average in that series, I think they would have won. That was his only final series that he wasn't good in. The other 9, he's been spectacular, and he could have won MVP in series that he didn't even win. But that was the bad one against Dallas. He put so much pressure on himself. They ended up losing. I thought Dallas was past their prime when they won it because they were actually better a few years before when they actually lost to the Heat with Dwayne Wade and Shaq. But it was just the right time for Dallas. They caught fire at the right time. And I mean, it was basically Dirk Nowitzki, an ancient Jason Kidd, and
Jason Terry.
Jason Terry. Yeah, I mean, that was pretty much the whole team. I mean, like the Miami Heat couldn't beat them, and it was LeBron's fault. He played poorly in that finals. I'll admit when my guy plays poorly, but yeah, the Miami of the teams they beat in the finals was certainly the weakest.
Yeah. So, if the Lakers, like we said, right now, if they played in the first round, it would be Denver.
Mm-hmm.
And then they'd play the winner of the 1-8 series, which right now would stand to Utah against whoever the hell comes out of that play-in tournament. And the Lakers I think the Lakers would be favored to beat Utah, Sap. Even though Utah would have home court advantage, the Lakers would have the money behind them, and people would be so.
Oh, sure.
Until the Lakers face a team that they have closer to even odds with, or that they're the underdog, LeBron's not going to get credit for beating them because that's just how it goes. And I'm not a huge LeBron guy, but I do realize that there's some unfairness inherently with that sort of philosophy. But the biggest accomplishment he could have, obviously, is if he gets through the Clippers and gets through the Nets. I mean, that is a monumental accomplishment.
Yep, teams that were built to beat him specifically. And if he was able to beat both of those teams, then that championship would probably rank second behind his one championship in Cleveland, which it's going to be tough to surpass that because he beat a team that was 73-9 that had a 3-1 lead in the finals. That's an incredible accomplishment.
He would have had a tougher road to get to the finals in this Western Conference than he did in the Eastern Conference back then, which is basically the LeBron James Invitational for about a decade. So, yeah, there's 2 weeks left to go. There's far more questions than answers, and it will be fascinating to see how these teams play down the stretch and what the playoff seeding will be like, especially again in the West, is going to be really interesting because we know the top 3 seeds in the East. We know in some order that it's going to be Brooklyn, Philly, Milwaukee, and that they'll, whoever the other teams are kind of just there for the as invited guests to the party of those 3 teams.
Sure.
I'm really interested to see it, Sap. One of the teams that we talked about is Phoenix, who's playing, above, I think, what everybody thought they were this year. And a big reason why is Chris Paul. And now you're hearing, I think Kendrick Perkins tweeted out that Chris Paul should be MVP last night. Does Chris Paul have any legitimate case in your mind for MVP?
I love Kendrick Perkins. He changes his mind as often as I change my socks. Like 3 weeks ago, James Harden was the greatest player in the league. And of course, Perk is a huge LeBron guy. And I love Perk, but that's what you can do. You can change your mind. It doesn't mean you have to be, stuck on a take for 6 months. I think that Chris Paul is going to get a lot of votes to the point where he may be second in MVP voting because Joel Embiid has missed a lot of games. And if they're not the number 1 seed, I think he'll probably finish third. We know LeBron's going to finish, 5th or 6th because, he's going to end up missing more than 20 games. I think Chris Paul is going to get some of the sentimental vote because MVP voting is oftentimes tied to a story, right? Remember Derrick Rose won the MVP with the Chicago Bulls when LeBron had a better year, but the Bulls had the best record in the East. Here was Derrick Rose, young guy playing in his hometown. You couldn't help but like and root for him. And there's obviously MVP fatigue with a lot of the all-time great players. Jordan should have more than 5, and LeBron should have more than 4, and Russell should have more than 5. I mean, these guys could have just won every year while they were in their prime. Chris Paul winning the MVP would be somewhat similar to the way Steve Nash won back-to-back MVPs. His numbers weren't like otherworldly, but they were good enough to be in the conversation. And then when you weigh in how the team is playing and the impact they've had on that team, he's got a viable chance. I still think Nikola Jokic is going to win this thing. He hasn't missed a game. Denver's fighting potentially for the best record in the West. I mean, it's a long shot that they get there, but they're going to have one of the 5 or 6 best records in basketball. And this guy's putting up numbers that are like ludicrous. They're like Larry Bird type numbers. So I think
remember
Jokic
they
is going to
started
get
off poorly too. They started the season poorly, and now they're 42-21 Sap right now.
That's damn good. They're playing 67% winning basketball. That's damn good. And I think they were one team that, again, they made it to the Western Conference Finals, so they had a pretty short offseason. not as short as the Lakers and Heat, but the same offseason that the Celtics had. And I think those four teams well, the Celtics I'm not going to get into because I don't want to infuriate you, but the Nuggets have now righted the ship, and he's doing this without Jamal Murray.
Yeah, they're 6-1 without Jamal Murray
since he got hurt, and they were playing great before he came back and then got hurt. So Jokic to me is the MVP. The numbers are like silly, but Chris Paul's going to get a lot of votes because of his leadership. And what's the difference from Phoenix last year to this year? Chris Paul.
Yeah.
They had Devin Booker last year. He's better than he was last year. DeAndre Ayton is better than he was last year. You know what I think of Monty Williams. I think he should be coach of the year. But the guy that's really elevated this team is Chris Paul. Look what he did in OKC last year, a team with just disparate parts thrown together. He got them as the number 5 seed and almost beat Houston in the first round. I think he's going to get a lot of love. Now, Chris Paul has finished in the top 7 in MVP voting 8 times. So the voters appreciate what he brings. And I think it's going to be a pretty sentimental choice. But I can't see how you take it away from Jokic because his numbers are similar to what Giannis's numbers were in his back-to-back MVP winning seasons. And sometimes you just have to give it to that guy because the numbers just, are so much better than everyone else's. I mean, Chris Paul's averaging 16, 17 a game, 8.5, 9 assists. Those are really good numbers. He does more than just score and pass. He's a great defender. He's a leader. I think the players respect him. I think he finishes second, though, especially if Phoenix ends up with the best record in basketball, he's going to have some votes.
Yeah, it's more about looking at what Phoenix was last year and what they have been. Actually, they just clinched this playoff spot for the first time in 11 years. So that's like you said, that's the sort of the story is looking at like, okay, well, what's the difference, as you said, between last year and this year? Chris Paul. And those players have improved, I think, a large part because, when you have a really good point guard, a player who makes other players better, they improve. But yeah, I can't see taking away from Jokic. I mean, what more does he have to do? Really, they're only 3.5 games out of having the best record in basketball, Sap. And they have not missed a beat with their second best player out. Jokic has been asked to do basically everything and hasn't missed a game. The team hasn't faltered at all. So I don't know how you take it away from him. I don't really even think it's on an honest discussion. At this point, I think he's far and away the MVP, and everything else is just speculation. I know our guy Mike Molino also is campaigning for Chris Paul to win MVP, but I think he'll get votes. I agree with you, and he should, but he should be getting second or third or fourth, that vote, not one. Really, this should be because of the games played, Sap. It should be pretty unanimous. I just don't know how you take it away from him.
And Chris Paul's been very durable as well. And give him credit. He's a veteran guy who I'm sure could say, I need to load manage. I'm 35, 36 years old, and he hasn't chosen to do that. So I give him a ton of credit for that. He sets a really good culture in your organization. Maybe after 2 or 3 years, he starts to irritate and weigh on people. Yeah. So he'll go somewhere else. He's become like a mercenary. I mean, you can just picture if the Celtics had been able to acquire him last offseason. I mean, if they had the cap space and all of that to do that, just think how much better the Celtics would be with him as the leader and letting Tatum and Brown do what they do, which is just go out and play and not have to lead. No, Jokic deserves this award. But, we see sometimes with the Oscars, they give it to an actor or an actress who didn't really give their greatest performance ever, but it was time to give them an Oscar. I just think back to Al Pacino, Scent of a Woman. I thought he was outstanding in it. But that's not Al Pacino's best performance. It's either in The Godfather, Godfather Part 2, Dog Day Afternoon, Serpico, pick, a half a dozen movies. But sometimes the Academy, which is made up of voters, it's not just this independent Academy, but the voters say it's time to give Al Pacino an Oscar. It's a Lifetime Achievement Award. I don't think the voters will do that this year with Chris Paul, but I do think he's going to finish second because Embiid's missed too many games, and Dame Lillard's play is kind of flattened off a little bit here. LeBron obviously has missed too many games. Giannis, for some reason, we've kind of forgotten about, and he's starting to miss some games. Luke, I think, is kind of one of the players that's got his arrow pointed up because Dallas is playing really well. But it's Luka. It's Nikola Jokic's award to win. I can't see it not going to him.
Yeah, what's interesting is Chris Paul, I guess you're right, he could end up finish second, but I don't think he's even going to make first team All-NBA because I think Curry's going to take that point guard spot.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting. Actually, That's happened before. I believe Russell won an MVP, but Wilt was first team All NBA. That has happened before. Yeah, that's a whole other discussion for another day. Like, who should be first team All NBA? What would the backcourt be? If we're going to start, dividing up into point guards and shooting guards, I mean, Harden's missed too many games now to be first team All NBA. Maybe it's Steph Curry and Chris Paul as first team All NBA in the backcourt.
Yeah, typically they don't like to do that. They don't
Yeah.
like to put 2 point guards. But yeah, I guess it could be. Yeah, how many games?
Luka's got to be in that discussion too, right?
Bradley Beal.
I'd leave him off. I mean, he's been outstanding. Seems more like a second team All NBA or third team All NBA, which is important to these guys because it does impact future earnings. So yeah, that's pretty fascinating. Look, Luka's got to be in that discussion as well. I mean, this is my point that we keep bringing up, Jed, is how deep the NBA is. Like there's going to be people left off third team All NBA. I mean, Jaylen Brown may not make third team All NBA.
All NBA teams,
Jason Tatum, but they're so deep now, the league.
Any of the All NBA teams should be able to beat the other All NBA team, in a given series, right? First team could beat second team, second team could beat first team, third team could beat first team because it's that deep now. Like you said, there's no more. It's sort of like the All-Star game. There's no more scrubs making the All NBA team.
Chris Gatling made the All-Star team. Eddie Jones made the All-Star team, I believe, 3 times. Al Horford made it 5 times. Yeah, good for them. I mean, God bless them, but those guys aren't sniffing the All-Star game in this NBA.
No, and when the season wraps up, we'll do our 3 All NBA teams, and we'll have all those. And we're also going to do our NBA Razzies with the worst teams. It's going to be made up primarily of Celtics bench players. One quick note, Seth, before we get out of here. I would be remiss not to mention the 50-point game put up by Kevin Porter Jr. last night of the Houston Rockets. Sap, I just want to – we don't have to talk about this because the Rockets are so irrelevant, but I know you love numbers, and you're going to love this one. 5.6% of Kevin Porter Jr.'s total career points occurred last night in that 50-point game. Over 5% of his career points in one game. What do you make of that?
That's pretty good. It finally caught fire, right? He finally woke up and figured it out, how to go out and score 50 points. And just think about how many great players never reached 50 points. It's not easy to get to 50 points. Good for him to go and do that. Becomes something to talk about for, 12 hours in the NBA. And then he'll go back to being what he is, which is, a fringe player. But I do think you have to bring into the point that this year, probably more than ever, it's been easier to score in the NBA than at any time. And I think part of it is because there's no fans in the stands or it's limited. Defense is emotion, effort, and sometimes that comes from the fans, right? So let's say the Celtics are playing at TD Garden with a full house and they're protecting a 3-point lead and 18,000 people are screaming, and the Celtics 5 defenders are pumped up and they're playing to their max level and they come up with a big stop. So it's defense, I think, improves with bigger crowds. Also, the fringe players don't play as well in front of big crowds that are hostile. No one's facing that right now. So I think that scoring is up in the NBA, not because the defense isn't as good. It's just that I think that it gets elevated because of the fans in the stands. So, but good for him to go out and get 50 points. That's an awesome accomplishment.
I was going to say, give Kevin Porter Jr. credit.
Yeah,
he did it against the Bucks too.
Good defensive team.
Yeah, very good defensive team. And so, Porter lit it up. He joins such luminaries as Terrence Ross, Brandon Jennings, Tony Delk, as guys that I did not expect to ever have 50-point games.
No. And then there's guys that never, in that sense, doesn't it feel like a no-hitter in baseball? Like there's been guys that have thrown no-hitters and you go, that pitcher sucks. How did he throw a no-hitter? Meanwhile, Roger Clemens, Pedro Martinez, Greg Maddux never threw no-hitters. They've never had a no-hitter, and they're 3 of the 5 best pitchers I've ever seen. But, guys, there's been multiple pitchers that have thrown 2 that A.J. Burnett, remember he was with the Marlins? I think he threw 2 no-hitters. And
Mark Burley have like 2 or 3.
Well, he was great to watch because he worked quicker than anybody.
But he had a
You know,
couple no hitters too.
I think he did. I think he had a perfect game in there. But I used to love watching him pitch because the game would be 2 hours and 12 minutes. He pitched like he was double parked or had dinner reservations. So he was fun to watch pitch, compared to David Price, who takes like an hour and a half between pitches.
Yeah. He did. He pitched a perfect game.
Yeah.
July 23rd, 2009. Mark Burley.
Yeah.
Who was there was a pitcher. Why am I forgetting? Orioles and Yankees, who had a great, really good pitcher who had like a bunch of one hitters, almost pitched perfect game a couple times. Why am I forgetting his name right now?
Mike Mussina.
Mike Mussina. Thank you.
Mike Mussina had a lot of one hitters. He's in the Hall of Fame now.
At the end, right? They kept getting broken up in like the ninth inning.
I was at a game actually when Mussina was pitching for the Yankees. It was Sunday Night Baseball, 2001. It was Labor Day weekend, so it was literally a week before 9/11. A Sunday night game at Fenway Park. Mussina pitching for the Yankees, David Cohn pitching for the Red Sox. Mussina has a perfect game with 2 outs in the ninth. And at that point, the Red Sox were totally out of contention, and the Yankees were on their way to going to the World Series again. So the crowd's there rooting for the perfect game. Here you are at Fenway Park. The Yankee pitcher is getting cheered to finish a no-hitter, a perfect game, in fact. And of all the people to break it up, Carl Everett.
He didn't believe in dinosaurs.
He didn't believe in dinosaurs. I'm assuming he was one of your favorite Red Sox players of that era.
No, because of I love dinosaurs, Sap. That's why.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
You like dinosaurs? You've crossed me.
Okay, yeah, you are a fan of dinosaurs. So you must love the Flintstones.
Yeah, I believe also he did not believe in the moon landing.
He didn't believe in anything. He was constantly fighting with everybody, teammates, writers, opposition. Yeah. In fact, when I had my restaurant, I had a little section set up, for Barry Bonds with pictures of him and, Sports Illustrated cover. It's a shrine. It was a shrine for Barry Bonds because they actually thought that I was Robert De Niro in The Fan, a pretty good movie that came out in 1994, which kind of had a Barry Bonds type character played by Wesley Snipes playing left field for the San Francisco Giants. I mean, how obvious can you be? And some woman came in and looked up there and she was looking at the pictures. She goes, "This is very nice. It's nice that you have a lot of pictures of Carl Everett." And I'm like, Please get the hell out of my restaurant. Do not compare Carl Everett to my guy.
Pretty close in terms of overall career accomplishments.
Yeah, pretty much talent. You know what I got to do, Jet, is now that I'm just looking and seeing how much headroom I have here as we do the YouTube version of this, I'm going to start wearing a top hat, so that I'm going to get the Abe Lincoln hat. Hopefully the day ends better than,
better yet,
the day of the play. Yes, I'm going to start doing that.
Recreate the Barry Bonds shrine above your head, so it looks like he's looking down on you.
It's a basketball podcast. I'll have to create a shrine of LeBron James.
Nah, I think look, I got non-basketball stuff behind me too.
Yeah, I know. I got to do something because I look ridiculous. I mean, I've got like 4 feet of headroom here.
Whatever.
I should be one of the cone heads, like from Saturday Night Live.
It's I think it's people are listening to the content and not focusing on the headroom, Sap.
That's not a good thing either. Sometimes I say some crazy shit.
You just got to make sure you say good stuff so they're not focused on the headroom. But so good. Congratulations to Kevin Porter Jr., who scores 5% of his points in one game. Unexpected, but that's the NBA for you. You get unexpected stuff. So until then, this has been the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. We are presented by Full Press Coverage. Make sure you check out their website for this podcast and other great podcasts, and make sure you download us. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/JetStryer. Leave some comments. We'll comment back, and we will be back tomorrow with another podcast. See you, everybody.